Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your partners for the anniversary waltz, we'll make a start. I'm really glad to see so many of you have returned after lunch, and this will be. We'll try and keep it quiet so we don't disturb your slumbers after such a magnificent lunch. Thank you, Dwayne, for organising that. But this session follow the same format. We will have short speeches from each of our four panelists, and then questions for clarification, and then a conversation at the end, finishing by 3 o'clock sharp. So I'm delighted that you're back. Our topic is new models for patient engagement, improving research participation. And this is a very timely conversation to be having because obviously we've talked a lot about the importance of getting involved with patients, about making sure that the research is timely and appropriate. I mean, traditionally, when you think about it, we had this kind of hierarchical top-down model where, scientists invented, industry developed, doctors prescribed, and patients took and were grateful whether it worked or not. But that's no longer appropriate in today's world of rare diseases, of precision medicine, of new ways of thinking about generating evidence on clinical utility, about safety, about effectiveness, and so on. So what we need to create, if you want to have a framework where patients feel comfortable and are enthusiastic in participating in research, is a research framework that fits our lives. Funnily enough, we were not put on the planet to provide interesting subjects for you to do clever research about. It's about you thinking about how you can generate the information you need in order to create effective novel interventions in ways that answers the questions that you need to have answered, rather than the questions that perhaps it would be nice to have answered, but where the evidence, the information can only be generated at the expense of considerable inconvenience for patients who are going through the process. And if you get that right, then your research will go more quickly, you will get better enrollment, you'll get better retention, it will be cheaper, quicker, easier, and you'll be more likely to see the outcome translated into clinical practice than if you do it in the traditional way. Just as I said earlier, patients don't have any interest in drugs that don't work. We also have no interest in poor quality research. We are a scarce commodity for you, and you need to value us. So we need to be confident that the questions you are asking are the right questions, and you're asking them in a way that is most likely to reveal the data, the information, the results that we need to make progress. We also need to be convinced that the questions that you're asking are important questions. Many research funding charities in the UK have adopted a kind of twin-track approach to answering these questions. They have the traditional scientific and clinical advisory panel that reviews applications for research grants. And they look at the scientific quality, they look at the methodology, they look at the hypotheses and what have you. Because they can determine whether the researcher is approaching the question that he or she is seeking to answer in a robust, a rigorous, and a rational manner. But in parallel with that, they have a patient or a patient and carer panel. And the job of the patient and carer panel is to decide if what the researcher wants to do is important enough. And very often, these are the people who have been involved in raising the money and generating the resources to enable the research grant system to be established. And if you can't convince the people who've raised the money, the people who have or are caring for the people who've got the disease that you're trying to address, that what you want to do is important, then maybe you haven't thought about it deeply enough, and maybe you should think about how you can go back and replan your proposal such that you can persuade concerned and informed people why you should be allowed to do what you want to do. When these panels were first set up, a lot of academics, a lot of clinicians said, oh, you can't possibly allow patients and families to have the veto because they'll only be interested in stuff that's, near bedside. Far from it. If you've got a life-limiting disease, yes, sure as hell you want good quality care and current treatment that reflects optimum practice. But given a choice, you'd really rather not be needing to have that treatment because there was an intervention that either cured or prevented or resolved the disease that you were affected by. So patients are really interested in the whole of the research process, from biomedical, biomolecular level investigations right through to the point of delivery of patterns of care in medicine and in society. And what some of these charities that have this twin track system have found that actually the quality of the proposals they receive has gone up over time, because you can't sort of kick your ideas into the sort of scientific long grass where they get sort of muddied around, and your peers, they know what you want to do, and you're a good chap, and you think they think you'll do a good job, and you'll spend the money on what you say you're going to spend it on, and it will potentially advance the knowledge. So I think making the process transparent, making the process accessible to those who hope to benefit from it is essential. And it's important to think too about how you're going to plan and disseminate what you're doing, because the old days when it was all a kind of closed shop where experts talked to experts and they might have talked to a small number of patients have gone. This conference has been tweeting furiously about the things that are said here. There are social media, Facebook groups, Twitter accounts, what have you, which disseminate the word about what you're doing, which spread the word about, does this sound like a good idea? Do I want to enroll in this project? Do I want to be a subject in this trial? And if I am in this trial, and there are a number of examples of where Facebook groups and other social media forum have actually set about unblinding the trial so that you can determine as a patient whether you're in the experimental group or in the placebo group. So if you're going to be able to do that, then your traditional routes to generating evidence are not going to work longer. So what we're going to do in the next hour and 20 minutes is look at this question: how can we improve research participation by engaging with patients in new and creative ways? So we're going to go straight through the speakers, opportunity for questions of clarification after each speech, and then a discussion at the end. So Danius, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, it's my honor, pleasure to be here and to talk to the remainings of the audience. In fact, before coming here, I, as usually, look to the search engines. And let's say in Medline search, patient recruitment for clinical trial, it was around 8 tough results. If to look to the Google search engine, we got patients' engagement in clinical trial is 14 million. If we look at the patient in clinical trials, we got 36 million of results. And patients' recruitment for clinical trials is nearly 45 million of results. What it means? It means that the data are coming not from the sources which are scientifically approved, but it's coming from the Google and from the public. So in this respect, I shortly report on the study done in Lithuania. It's about 280 patients questioned about from where they got information about clinical trials. And these were two groups. One is information obtained from the physician, from the doctor, another from somewhere else, public, media, internet, and so on. So these two groups are incomparable in the willingness and in the future willingness to participate in clinical trials when they got correct information from their physician. Why I'm telling this? In fact, we are talking a little bit outside. We're talking about small part of the healthcare and healthcare research. To come to the logic end, we should start from the beginning. We should start from the normal, acceptable diagnostic. We should talk about, let's say, for solid tumors. We should talk about surgery, but not about personalized medicine in beginning, and later maybe about surgery after. So the rules of the treating the patient are quite clear to some extent. So when we are talking about quality control, what it means quality control. I remember 10 years ago, it was a perfect article of Bruce Minsky and Alfred Cohen from Memorial Sloan Cancer Catering Center. Why United States still need radiation therapy in rectal cancer? You will not guess. Why? Because of poor quality, not standardized quality in surgery. So if things first are things first to do. So when we come to the logic end with some quality assurance, some minimal standard of the care, we can talk further on. And here we have the surgeon or physician. Originally it was about cardiac surgeon. The question is, what are differences between cardiac surgeon and the God? Correct answer is, God is not thinking he is cardiac surgeon. So, you know, and it shows us that anecdotes are from the life. So it shows that physician, surgeon involved in the treatment of the patient and in research of the patient data and different variables is most of the important factor in the whole chain. Because if physician, at least in the east and central part of Europe, I don't know about Ireland, England, but in this part of Europe, the patient will listen what the doctor is saying. And if doctor says, it's stupid trial, just run away, he will do that. And if doctor says, you could benefit from this, it's interesting, it could be nice, it could be good for you, he will listen. Of course, it will be some proportion of the patients which will decide themselves on opinion of Google, media, and so on. So, my idea is how we can engage more patients and to make this more open. It's so-called shared decision making, which is quite a modern approach in the treatment, but this should be probably in clinical trials as well. Those who are interested could look into the Cochrane review just recently published about the shared decision making in different situations. And of course, training, education of society and the patients and the doctors is very, very important. As is social media, as it was said by our chairman, sometimes gives different and not always correct impressions about what's going in clinical trials, in the biomedical research, especially if it comes to embryonic cells, stem cells, and so on and so on. So I think education doctor engagement, which was not mentioned quite frequently during this conference, and of course all other stakeholders like patients' organizations, payers, regulators, and lawmakers is engaged in this process. So it's only complex possibility to move forward. Okay.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Has anybody got any questions or clarification for Danius?
Late.
Good. I've got one for you, because you're a clinician and you have been a politician. I don't know if you.
And researcher.
And a researcher.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, you've said about the importance of what doctors can say in influencing their patients. What about what can politicians do to help encourage a climate where there is active research with patient engagement?
For politicians, it's very difficult because general public looks at the politicians as people trying to earn some illegal money. So if you will advocate pharmaceutical research, you are dead. So immediately. So in fact, politicians are at the best neutral. Saying, oh, should listen to this, to patients, to industry, to academics, and so on and so on. And later we will think, and maybe we will take some decision. So it moves very slowly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So with that optimistic view of the political classes, shall we move on and have Vicky Seifert-Margolis? Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you. That's hard to follow that. That was not what I expected the answer to be, I have to say. So I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about identity and how I think we need to change identity. So we were talking about human subjects, and I don't think people like being subjects. I actually think they want to be co-researchers. And I don't think people like being patients. I think people want to be health consumers. And so I think we have to think hard about what is the typical experience of a patient in a clinical trial, or what is the typical experience of a patient in clinic, and how are they making that transition from the clinic experience to their health consumer life? Because the vast majority of where health is happening in their consumer life. It's not happening in clinic. It's not happening in the clinical trial. And yet the stuff we understand the least about is actually what's probably, for the most part, determining their health outcomes, which is everything that's happening outside the clinic. We have a lot of sophisticated tools now in EMRs for managing the in-clinic life in a role where patients are that they fundamentally don't want to be in and they don't like. They want to get out of that role. They want to get into their real life, and they want to do stuff in their real life, and they want to figure out how to fix a problem they have. I was at a talk recently, and they said the experience of engaging the healthcare system should be thought of as similar to engaging an auto mechanic. You go in, you got a problem, you want it fixed. And you want to get out and you want your car to be working again. Same thing here. You go in, you want your problem to be fixed. And when you're in that transition, what is the typical experience you're having? Well, you're getting wheeled out on a wheelchair with a stack of papers from Epic. Somewhere buried in there, your discharge instructions and your prescriptions. You got a bag of clothes on the one hand and you got your instructions on the other. Wheeled up to the curb, the orderly drops you off, you get in the car, and then your spouse or your loved one who's supposed to be helping you through that journey is sitting there, and you're shuffling through these papers and you're trying to figure out, okay, how am I now the empowered person to take charge of my health destiny after having been through a very traumatic experience? And the answer is we do a really crappy job all along the continuum of engaging our patients not just as health consumers, but also as co-researchers. So what I've been thinking about a lot and what I've been studying is what is the experience on the ground level? And Laura talked about what's going on for real in primary practice. What is going on for real in primary care practice? And what is going on for real in the experience of the patient as they are discharging or as they are in the clinic and then they're entering their real world? And we've been very much focused on working where we know there are drivers right now in the healthcare system to change that experience, to really try to figure out how to move patients from being most of the time stewards managed in clinic to a management strategy out of clinic. That's in part of what healthcare reform has been bringing here, at least in the United States, is managing to outcome. So, where are their drivers right now? Well, there's actually a lot of action happening in Medicaid right now. There are many, many programs that are aimed at trying to figure out how to manage to outcome with very difficult to manage patients. So we went in and we started talking and working with folks there on the ground level, at the grassroots, to build technology that works for them. What is important in any solution in the healthcare system that we're learning is 3 factors: transparency, trust. Where's the trust lie? And folks, it doesn't always lie in the doctor-patient relationship. It often lies in the relationship that patients have with nurses, care coordinators, social workers, community health workers, pharmacists, and people who are more on the front lines of healthcare. And by the way, can do a hell of a good job really becoming stewards. And in some of these programs that are now being implemented at large integrated delivery networks across this country at least, and some in Europe, there's an increasing responsibility and an increasing recognition that these people in the healthcare system play a critical role in out-of-clinic management. So we work with them to provide tools to help power them up. Who's the next important person, and who's probably the most highly incented person in this equation for managing patients? Their caregiver in the home. As much as we know the patient cares, probably the person who cares more is the person that's in charge of taking care of them, whether it's a daughter taking care of an aging parent, whether it's a mom taking care of their kid, whether it's a dad or a man taking care of his sick wife. All those people play a critical role. They need to be connected. Technology can be used to connect them. And then finally, of course, there's the patient, and what does the patient care about, and how can we use the connectivity and the technology in order to create and understand that out-of-clinic experience. From the pharma side, I can't tell you how important it is to understand what is actually happening to your products, because most of where your products are being used is out-of-clinic. Where that real-world effectiveness is being determined is out-of-clinic in large part. And so we really need to dig in and think about how we can create these alignments, not just for outcomes management, but also in our total product lifecycle management. End-to-end, how do we get a handle on what's going on in the real world, and how does that influence the real-world effectiveness of our products? And so I'll just close by saying I think there's lots of opportunities now because there's a huge transition going on in healthcare with a lot of options and a lot of creativity out there on the ground level that can be taken advantage to really learn and to really listen. And once we listen, I'm convinced we can create much better solutions, not only for next generation products, but for the products that we currently have in hand to drive much better effectiveness in the real world.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Vicky before we move on? No? Yes, at the back. Can you wait for here comes the microphone.
Well, thanks for that interesting discussion, but a couple of questions. One is, as like you said, when you give somebody something to take home, you haven't any idea what's actually going to happen to them. And we know, at least from my experience with pharma, only about half the patients take the drug they're supposed to be taking. Or if they do take it, they only take it half the time. Or they don't refill a prescription to be able to do that. But I'm sure maybe similar to you guys, but one of the biggest problems I find is with my mom, who listens to her friends and not to her doctor or caregiver or health professional. And they say, well, I heard that you don't need to take them all the time. Don't worry about it, you'll be fine. Or if you miss one, take them all at once. Right? So in your schema of what you're thinking about, how do you start to address some of those more lax social, sort of friendly friends and family kind of ignorance and or misinformation to try to help compliance?
Yes, I think that goes back to the trust issue. Pew did a study recently about where people are seeking health information, and friends and family have a profound influence on how people look at and how they engage with their health. I think it's information. I think one of the missing links, and certainly one of the things we've been finding, is that there is not that level of trusted connectivity often in the in the doctor-patient relationship because it's so fragmented. And quite frankly, the average time spent of a doctor listening to a patient is about 5 to 15 seconds in several studies that have been reported. So it's not the physician's fault. They're busy, right? And they have a job to do to architect a care plan. I think it could be done better. But where we're finding trusted movement of information is by getting more communication loops going with these other levels of healthcare delivery, whether it's a navigated patient strategy, whether it's a community health worker, which can be incredibly effective, or a nurse or a care coordinator, somebody who's got information but is working on a more even keel and even level with the patient so they don't feel intimidated, which they often do by a doctor, and where there's a more high-frequency touch-point relationship that can help dispel the rumors of their friends, but in a trusted conversation where a lot of patients feel judged when they go to the doctor, and they don't so much in these other relationships.
I think your mother's been talking to my mother. It's dreadful, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you. This was an interesting presentation, but we are not cars, and we are not going to change parts. And we cannot throw our old car and get a new one because obviously we are patients, all of us. So it's interesting what you're saying, but how are you going to apply it to 500 million people?
I don't think,
the average 75-year-old has 3 to 4 pathologies and is on average 5 to 8 medications every day. How are you going to make that particular individual that may not have attended medical school to know what is the difference between, an adverse effect or whatever that is, or something that is happening due to one of his medication and not the other, or educate all that environment?
So first of all, I don't want to lead you to believe I think people are like cars. I just thought it was sort of funny in terms of the expectations that people have when they engage with the system is they want to fix a problem, and it's often very complicated and not easy to fix. I don't think I have a solution for 500 million people, but I think that the healthcare systems have to work in concert with strategies that enable you to scale workflow and management across your patients in a fundamentally different way that incorporates these other levels of healthcare beyond the doctor. And we're working in very hard to manage. I'm working right now successfully. We're managing large cohorts of type 2 diabetes patients in very low income, low literacy, low education. This is Rio Grande Valley in Texas, primarily Latino, average family income $17,000 per year. And all I can tell you is the experience that we're having is that by creating these trusted relationships with people who have information that they can share, you can do it, and you can do it fairly economically, and you can do it at scale. And so I think we have to begin to be creative in working with our provider systems, aligning to the drivers where the money flows, because the money is a big part of it, and there is money flowing into these new models now. It can be done, but we have to learn also. I mean, we don't know the solutions yet. I think we have to do some listening right now to try to understand what's actually going on, because nobody really knows what's going on, and that's part of our problem.
Thanks. I think maybe that's a topic we can return to when it comes to the conversation, but I think now we'll move on, and Bart, Thank
you. And I think just that statement, nobody knows, is a perfect introduction to my speech. I certainly don't know. And if people were cars, I wouldn't want to be a Volkswagen at this point in time. Okay. All right. So,
data be good.
Well, my data would be flawed, but okay. So what I'm going to try and do is give one company's perspective, and even that is not true because I'm one person within a large company. But indeed, the remit is, okay, what is the importance of patient engagement? And let me maybe start with introducing you to Dr. Paul Janssen, who is the founder of Janssen Pharmaceutica. So he started back in 1953 with the company from scratch, from nothing. And his motto has been all his life, the patients are waiting. Why are we doing all of this? Well, because the patients are waiting. We really have to get going. We need to find a really new, interesting medication because the patients are waiting. And I don't disagree. Now, obviously, Janssen became part of Johnson & Johnson in 1961, and J&J is very well known for its credo, the values by which the company is operating. And actually, the first paragraph of our credo is our first responsibility is to doctors, nurses, and the patients. So there again, I think that we have it in our genes to really care for patients. But do we really do that actively? I mean, isn't it a bit like what Alistair was introducing? Wasn't this a bit of kind of hierarchical kind of thing? Isn't the patients are waiting? Isn't that kind of passive? Is that still relevant for these days? So I think we should question how we are approaching patients in research and in general. And so imagine a world where this would be possible. I mean, I know it's after lunch. I don't know what was served in lunch or at lunch, but I mean, we can dream, can't we? I mean, one of the other statements of Dr. Paul was that the human mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. So if we have an open mind, these are things that are achievable. And yesterday, I think we also mentioned this, that actually every encounter between a patient and a healthcare system is an opportunity to learn. And we need to learn faster. As a system, everyone involved in the healthcare or even the health process should actually learn faster. And certainly the need for patient engagement is there. I think this is a mood slide. I mean, the whole topic of this whole conference is there. Patients want to be involved. Patients are getting involved. And we as companies are waking up to it. And as Sandra said this morning, we are waking up. I mean, we're learning. I think that we are starting a journey of many years to come through which we will have to learn what our patients need, how to interact with patients, what are the good models of getting them involved, and so on and so forth. And in general, I think we're on a journey where, well, you could say today, maybe this was already yesterday, but certainly we come out of a very product-centric approach. And the 4 Ps of Porter are still very much in place. But we are indeed moving to this more integrated approach, where, of course, it's not a product which is the center of the world. It's the patient. It's actually the subject. It's the individual who is at the center of a universe, of an integrated universe. But to be able to do that, we will have to learn to work as partners together in this network with all stakeholders and really learn to understand more about this patient and what is driving this person. And to do that, and it's just one example of how we can learn from patients. There are obviously multiple technologies and techniques. Social media was mentioned a couple of times. Of course, we can interview patients, we can do virtual interviews with patients, and these are methods which we, as companies, are traditionally engaging in the market research domain, where we're trying to understand how patients behave. And I think market research probably has a deeper understanding of what patients want than our R&D colleagues. So how can we actually move this habit of studying what patients drives and how patients flow through their life and through their disease, how can we push that further upstream into the R&D space? And netnography, just to coin a little new word, or, well, it's not so new anymore because 6 years ago we did this type of analysis where we looked at what are people saying and through text mining really try to understand the kinds of concerns and well, positive, negative feelings around a certain disease do they feel. And then ethnography, really equipping, I should say, patients with tools to track their daily life and to study how they're going through their life in all kinds of activities of daily life. And we did this 5-6 years ago, for instance, on a population of type 2 diabetics. So we looked into all of the social media. We scraped, well, we didn't, but through a company, scraped publicly available conversations. I think by the end we had something like 150,000 conversations, and we tried to understand what really motivates, what drives, and what concerns patients. Now, this was a humbling experience for us. I mean, patients don't really talk very often about medication. It's maybe 10% at most, 8% of their conversations, but of course when it's 150,000, that's still a lot. But in the case of diabetics, what was really striking is that patients were saying two things. We don't want to be patients. I mean, we do not want to be confronted with our disease on a daily basis. So don't give me these gizmos that are going to give me a ticker tape of how my heartbeat is going and how my HbA1c level is going. Don't do that. I'm not interested. Doctors are not interested in that neither. The big data guys are interested in that because it's cool, it's nifty. So that's one. But secondly, we thought patients were going to talk about hypos or hypers and what have you not, or very abominable comorbidities. They weren't. They were really talking about how tired they are, how exhausting it is. And really, they were talking about, well, I know that I should change my lifestyle, but I'm so tired. I'm not doing it. So I'm doing less, I'm feeling tired. And what do you do when you're feeling tired? You take naps. So anyhow, so that was remarkable. I mean, we personally, I hadn't expected this type of outcome. Now, when I checked then with our R&D colleagues, is any of these a secondary endpoint in our clinical trials? No, of course not. I mean, we're looking at HbA1c levels or glucose or weight or whatever. So this just shows how by doing some social media mining, we might understand a lot about what patients are really concerned about, but then also we should translate this into how we are actually modifying our clinical trials and what are the clinical endpoints that we are measuring. So, future, way out there, big data. Yeah, we know about clinical history. I think we're getting to the multi-omics space as well, and I think that this type of data is starting to be covered. Where we're really still missing a lot is on the behavioral side. I mean, and when we really want to do precision medicine, or when we really want to draw conclusions for disease interception, for instance, or prevention of disease, we will have to get into this. But of course, you can never do this without the right framework. I mean, this has to be done in partnership with the patients. And this is this old statement that nothing about me without me certainly goes here. But if and when we're able to do that in full partnership, I think we will see a bright new future. And so I don't really like to disagree with our founder, of course not, but I think maybe we should update the patients are waiting statement a little bit by saying patients are partners. And they're still waiting. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks very much, Bart. Thanks. Clearly, if you were a Volkswagen, you wouldn't be one of those ones puffing out clouds of black smoke. So,
no.
You know, there you go. So, and is Dr. Janssen still alive?
No, unfortunately.
Then you can safely disagree with him. Yeah.
Well, I'm still a bit scared about that.
Yeah. Questions for Bart? Yeah. Yes. Gentleman there in front.
Hamid Genzyme. So there is an FDA guidance documents on patient-reported outcome measure using the standard methodology, which includes qualitative interviews, similar to market research in a way, to build a conceptual model and then develop an instrument, etc. If you're looking at new approaches like ethnography, using the net, etc., in order to prioritize endpoints, what would be the data package that would be acceptable to FDA or to regulators in general, or even to payer down the line? We heard before that, okay, the patient may not want to do a 6-minute walk test. They're happy to use a wheelchair, but they want to keep their arm movement. So how would this information be part of an evidence package?
You're really asking the wrong guy. I wouldn't know, honestly. I think that we should use this and other ways of gaining insight and then use that insight into the normal way of proceeding. It's a little bit like data mining. I mean, you're exploring, but you're not proving. So it's a way of getting new insight and then use that insight in the traditional way of working.
Another question? No? Okay, fine, thanks. Well, in that case, we'll move straight on to Jocelyn Ulrich. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Okay. First, I would just like to thank the conference organizers for asking me to participate today and to provide some insight into the clinical trial advocacy that we've been undertaking at PhRMA over the last several years. PhRMA is a U.S.-based trade association that represents the country's leading pharma companies, which are dedicated to inventing medicines that allow patients to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. So there may be no higher public health priority than accelerating the ability of researchers to navigate the drug development process to deliver new medicines and potential cures to patients in need, and that's why this conference and others like it are so timely and important. As participants in this conference are keenly aware, it is critical that stakeholders come together to address how we can collaborate more effectively with patients, to accelerate new regulatory pathways, harness new sources of evidence, and create the tools and methodologies to do so. So I would like to focus my remarks on several areas where PhRMA is working to drive transformation of the clinical trial ecosystem in these ways and to accelerate translation of scientific knowledge into new health solutions and facilitate the more efficient development of safe and effective medicines for patients. First, we work to advance policies that encourage multi-stakeholder solutions to addressing complex barriers to participation and to catalyze initiatives that will improve the recruitment and retention of volunteer participants, especially those that appropriately reflect the population at risk for the disease. Second, we work to advance innovative clinical trial designs, tools, and methodologies in drug development and regulatory decision-making. And third, we work to advocate to appropriately integrate the patient perspective into the drug development process and regulatory decision-making. To the question that was just asked, we have to be able to match this data with regulatory decision-making and drive that for patients. So one of the biggest obstacles to the successful completion of trials, as I'm sure has been discussed, is finding the volunteers to participate, leading to delays in the timely availability of new medicines to the patients that need them. And according to the Tufts study for this study of drug development, 2/3 of investigative sites fail to meet their enrollment requirements for a given trial. And sponsors typically double the planned enrollment to give sites enough time to recruit volunteers and complete. Even when cycle times are extended, 1 out of 4 sites on average will under-enroll, and 1 out of 10 sites will fail to enroll a single patient. And there are a broad range of barriers to participation that undermine the ability of research sponsors to achieve participation that is representative, including the complexity of trial designs, outdated infrastructure, lack of physician referrals to trials, lack of diverse investigators and research staff, a lack of trust, and practical obstacles such as lack of childcare, transportation, or the ability to take time off from work. And all of these are really compounded and disproportionately impact volunteers that are from lower economic status. And this is really a crisis in this country. There are many factors that can influence the effects of medicines and impact the benefit-risk assessment. So as Bart just discussed, not just the medicine itself, but the other factors that surround the patient, diet, culture, environment, et cetera. And we do have best practices for how FDA and ICH will approach this. And they emphasize that the best outcomes are achieved when the sample population of a trial is sufficiently diverse to represent the broader population at risk for the disease. However, historically, due to the barriers that I mentioned, we are not achieving that representative participation rate. And this is particularly challenging amongst patients or populations that self-identify as African American, Hispanic, and Asian. And in fact, according to a Research American study, African Americans represent 12% of the US population, but 5% of clinical trial participants. Hispanic populations make up 16% and only 1% of the clinical trial participants. The problem of being able to recruit and retain sufficiently heterogeneous populations to trials is really a multifaceted challenge that requires collaboration amongst federal institutions, industry, healthcare professionals, and patient advocacy organizations. So of all the barriers that I've discussed, I think the general lack of awareness about clinical trials is perhaps the most important and overarching barrier. In order to make progress against this problem, PhRMA has catalyzed a number of initiatives focused on increasing awareness and improving education. First, in partnership with the National Minority Quality Forum, we founded and launched a campaign called the I'm In campaign. It was a community-based social media educational campaign. This campaign is now fully under the leadership of our partner, NMQF, and we are proud to remain a champion of those ongoing efforts. We believe it's a matter of public health priority and health equity, that all patients are aware of the potential benefits of joining trials and have the opportunity to determine whether they are eligible to participate. Those conversations should be happening on a regular basis with their healthcare providers. Second, last May, we partnered with the Coalition for Clinical Trial Awareness and a number of other stakeholders to establish a National Clinical Trials Awareness Week, consisting of a social media campaign, outreach, educational activities around the US. And as part of the activities here in DC, we hosted, in partnership with the Center for the Study and Information on Clinical Research Participation, CISCRIP, it's a very long name, we partnered with them to do an Aware for All event, which we hosted here at George Washington University. And this is a public educational forum that provides free health screenings to the community and had a panel of participants from clinical trials to try to increase trust and break down barriers. Finally, PhRMA has worked on creating educational materials through our dedicated website on clinical trials, including MS fact sheets, educational videos, and an ongoing blog trying to answer questions about specific parts of the process as we move through the next several months. However, we also recognize that awareness and education are necessary but not sufficient for solving the problems. This is why we actively advocate for accelerating regulatory efforts to support the globalization and modernization of clinical trials. In particular, our advocacy efforts have focused on encouraging FDA to accept the validity of innovative clinical trials, designs, and statistical methodologies in establishing substantial evidence for regulatory decision-making. And these innovative approaches have the ability to provide a more flexible framework in clinical trials, but can also translate into studies that would possibly expose fewer patients to less beneficial treatments, especially using multiple arm trials, adaptive designs, et cetera. In addition, as mentioned, we need to leverage technologies and encourage government agencies, the industry and academia to work together to build increasing connectivity amongst stakeholders through the creation of research networks that would improve clinical research infrastructure. And we should also search for new and creative uses for advances that could improve communication and collect data in new ways. And these advances could allow participants to participate in clinical trials even when they don't have the advantage of being in close proximity to a major medical center or other clinical research hub. One of the most exciting ways in which the industry is approaching drug development, as mentioned by Bart, is this new patient-focused or patient-centered drug development approach. And although improving survival remains a key target for much of drug development, finding treatments that improve how the patient feels and functions is increasingly important. And patient advocacy groups have been working hard towards this goal for both the ability to have input into the trial design and also to the increased use of different measures, patient-reported outcomes, clinically observed assessments, et cetera, in the trial process and in regulatory decision-making. However, for this all to be successful, as the question that was raised earlier pointed out, it's really important that we systematically advance all of these tools and processes by advancing a predictable regulatory framework for decision-making that can take these tools into account. So, I think in summary, we at Pharma are actively working on advocacy efforts to move forward policies that can reduce these barriers and advance new ways of including patient input. And we are working towards a world where people of all demographic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds are aware of the value of and are participating in clinical trials, where global regulation and management of the process is harmonized and modernized, encouraging the appropriate use of science-based and innovative tools, designs, and methodologies, and where all of those include patient perspectives and preferences and remain respectful of the volunteer participants that are giving us all these answers. Thank you.
Questions for Jocelyn? Yeah, I mean, you described a number of initiatives, I mean, all of which sound very interesting. How good have they been? How have you measured their impact?
Yeah, measuring the impact is the hardest part of awareness and education. We have explored ways of doing some surveys, but at this point, we don't really have a hard metric. Around social media campaigns, we look at Twitter impressions, we look at website views, and we do see impact from those. People are looking and are checking. But in terms of this translating into the most important outcome, which is more participation, I don't think we're there yet, especially on the diverse populations.
Yeah. Anyone got other questions for? In which case, if I can ask all our panelists to come and take a seat at the front here. Yeah. Wherever you like. There, good. Good. Right, well, I mean, we've been talking about this improving research participation. I think one of the barriers that we haven't really talked about is kind of having a research-aware clinical community. The sort of making it part of every doctor's good practice to encourage their patients into research, rather than saying, well, there is this clinical trial, and if you want to get involved with it, I suppose you can, but it's an awful lot of hassle, and and I'll look after you just as well. Your care won't suffer. So if you really want to do it, then I'll find you another doctor who will enroll you. So how do we get that kind of research-active consciousness into clinicians who are the gatekeepers to clinical research?
Maybe I will.
Denis, you start.
In fact, some 25 years ago, at the end of the Soviet era, we have clearly a division of doctors who treat patients and academicians and researchers who do research. So one of my initiatives was to join research, education, and practice into one. Mm-hmm. So you cannot work in the university hospital if you are not in education, if you are not in research, and you are not treating patients. So maybe formulating the working place like this would be what you are talking about.
Yeah, that's the start, sure, but most patients are not seen in academic and tertiary centers. Yeah.
They see, because when you come to the patient to talk with him, after you it's coming 2 or 3 residents and like 10 undergraduate students, so they clearly understand that it's some professor from university who is treating you, coming with his new pupils.
Yeah, but
well, Alistair, you're brilliant in asking simple questions that are expecting a very complex answer. But yes, we need to do a better job. And I mean, if you know that, I think only can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. That only about 5% of cancer patients get enrolled in studies. I mean, that's nothing really. And if only 8-10% would get enrolled, I think that the speed with which we are able to do studies would actually be much faster and our delays would be solved. So again, this is just one potential element of a solution, but there is an IMI project, which I also would like to mention here, which is EHR for CR, where they looked at how can we reutilize available data in the hospital to improve study design, site selection, but also patient enrollment. And it's very clear that by utilizing available data across the hospital, that and to provide these types of lists to the PI or the trial nurse, that you can speed up enrollment. That's one. Second, I think we also should study the bureaucratic hurdles that patients have to overcome and doctors have to overcome to get enrolled in a study. I mean, it's becoming really burdensome, very burdensome.
Yeah, here's my consent form. It's only 43 pages.
Well, at least, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Jocelyn, what would you do to create a culture of research awareness amongst clinicians?
So, we've discussed within the pharma context potentially putting educational modules into medical schools where you could teach clinical research to doctors, encourage them to participate. But I do think that the community-based practices are not integrated enough into clinical research infrastructure. And there is a concern that we've heard and seen with patients or with physicians losing control of their patients or referring them out of the practice for their care. And I think that's a real barrier. And if we can't bring the clinical trials to those remote sites, then I think that continues to be an issue.
I was going to add on that, I think, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that there are lots and lots of people who are interested who are not being seen in the traditional go-to clinical trials sites. And I think what we're seeing at a lot of the go-to clinical research institutions is a competition of patients for trials, where an endocrinologist or somebody who's kind of does a lot of clinical trials may have 3 or 4 going on at one time, and there's a kind of competition about where they're going to shunt them. And at the same time, our experience has been that there's lots and lots of primary care and community-based hospitals that are very interested in participating. They just haven't been engaged. So I think those are important outreach efforts that need to be made.
Yeah, cheers, thanks. Gentleman at the back there, and then the lady here.
Again, Dave Dvorak from Oracle. Just a couple of questions and maybe an observation. For one thing, there are about 870,000 docs in the U.S., and only about 7% of them are clinical researchers, and only about half of them have done more than one study. So when you think about just the paucity of doctors to be PIs, it's a dismal number. And then you ask, well, why don't we have more docs become PIs? Well, first thing is that in the U.S., at least the U.S. healthcare environment, it's really hard. The second piece is it's a boatload of work to be a researcher, and you don't make any money out of it. I used to do programs to try to get docs to become researchers, and the first thing they asked me is, how much money can I make? And I said, well, after the $15 million investment, probably none. And also by the time you have to do it, and you have to hire 4 more people, and on and on and on to be able to make this stuff happen, and go learn how to be a researcher. So if you think about just the hurdles for doctors to become investigators, that's a huge problem. And then try to get them to even if you get more of them, try to get access to patients. But on the other side, if you look at it, say like in cancer studies, 7% of patients participate. But if you think about it, 85% of the patients that are seen, cancer patients that are treated, are not treated in any academic hospital. They're treated in community-based hospitals. And where do we put cancer studies? At cancer research centers. So when you think about it, we're putting the studies where the patients aren't. So that's another problem to be thinking about, is to try to think through how do you improve enrollment, how do you find more investigators, and then even if you look at academic institutions, not all of them are researchers. And how do you find the ones who are high throughput clinical guys to refer their patients to the researchers if they're going to lose control of the patient and lose revenue by the nature of doing that? So if you just think about the dynamics in the clinical research space, trying to improve participation is a Herculean task with multiple moving parts. So just be curious of what your thoughts are, and how do you change some of those dynamics, or even one of those dynamics?
Yeah, Vicky.
Well, I think there is some infrastructure that's being put in place where there are, if you look at some of the efforts with PCORI, et cetera, where there's large networks of patients being assembled, if you will, and clinical research practices being disseminated across community-based practice, hospitals and community-based practice models. And I think they are underfunded right now. A lot of it is coming from NIH or from PCORI, but there is interest there. I'm working with some of them, and there is some infrastructure there. I think it's just right now somewhat underfinanced and not connected. And so we need to do a better job of connecting it. I also think that if there was simplicity in terms of, again, some of the issues that Jocelyn was bringing up, how you can bring more of the trial to the patient and to these sites as opposed to having everybody go to Boston, which they don't want to do, that would be really helpful. And so I think there are ways to do it, but it will take some investment, but it's really important. And the foundations, I believe, are getting put in place.
Yeah, so Bart, it's your fault. You're putting your trials in the wrong place.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So
Intentionally.
there you go.
No,
Move them.
No. I again, it's one of these multifaceted, really challenging project or topics. I mean, we had a brainstorm within the company, for instance, and yes, we are still focusing on trial sites, and then we're kind of limited to the patients that come through those sites to be enrolled in the study with all the competition which is then of course on those sites, and there are fewer and fewer sites, and we are looking for efficiency gains obviously as well, because opening a site is a lot of money. So we try to turn it around and say, what if every patient could become a trial site? Well, you don't want to know what kind of bureaucratic nightmare that becomes. But still, I think it's exercises like that we should do as an industry, but probably also with the involvement of the regulators and the patient associations, that hopefully might get to some other models in which it becomes easier actually to become a partner in a study.
Yeah, Daniel.
Short remark as a man who conducted 4 clinical trials, 1 academic and 3 sponsored by the pharma. In fact, at least in Lithuanian hospitals, people are afraid to take of trial because it's a lot of ticking of the box. You need to do this, and this. You should make this analysis, have this specialist, make MRI to do this, and so on and so on. So, in fact, if the oncology trials are concerned, in Lithuania we have 2, maybe 3 hospitals who can fulfill all these requirements. And now when the PET scanning is coming up, it's only 1 hospital which is able to have all spectrum of infrastructure needed to do a proper clinical trial. It's another problem, I guess.
Thank you. The lady at the back.
Hi, Jen Beachel. I'm wondering if the panel could comment on the extent of integration of mobile technology in the hands of patients, utilizing it to report on their experience both during the clinical phase and in the post-clinical follow-on phase, how that might help to direct a clinical program into the future after the first approval or beyond, and how do we begin to open the eyes of the regulatory authority to utilize these data to help drive the clinical programs. It seems to me that that's really where the power of the patient, the patient voice could really lie.
Who wants to pick that one up? Yeah, go on. Well done, Vicky.
Clearly there's a lot of forays being made here. So Apple, for example, has something called Research Kit right now, which is being used by academic centers to recruit patients, and it's kind of relying on the cool wow factor of Apple in part, and has been somewhat successful in getting people signed up to participate in research. I think there's a lot of focus and attention right now, and I was glad to hear you talk about the limitations of wearables and sort of how people are enamored with this idea of 24/7 monitoring when, in fact, I think it's true patients don't want to really be reminded of their disease all the time. I think there's a really important role for mobile, but it needs to be done thoughtfully and carefully. And I think it's much more than putting a bunch of apps in an app store. To me, and what our experience has been is it's about connectivity, and it's about being able to connect people who are involved and engaged, get information where it needs to be, and simple workflow managements, quite honestly, that tie into clinical practice methods. I think recruitment could be facilitated if you get in there and you find ways to build it into the workflow of the system. And again, it may not be at the level of the physician, because a lot of the patient encounter and a lot of the exchange of information is happening at different parts of the healthcare system. You know, for example, one of the major high-frequency touch points of healthcare interventions in Latino communities is through churches. And, you know, there's a lot of healthcare information, a lot of patient education happening there, a lot of community-based health management emanating from churches that has not been exploited as a potential way to get awareness and engagement of patients and build it into their workflow. So I think mobile can really help scale, create workflows, create connectivity to mobile, technology to patients. I think on the regulatory side you asked, it's going to be about coming to the table with data. You know, the agency is not monolithic, and they will listen. And I think part of it will be about coming with a considered approach and considered data, and, you know, things will open up.
Bart.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, and maybe building a little bit on it. I think that mobile is, or wearables, are certainly be here to stay, and I think in the future they will have a very important role. I think at this point in time it's still more either in the space of gadgetry or in the space of really study. I think we still need to learn better. There are a few projects which are now starting to look whether we can, in certain diseases like depression or some other diseases, whether we can identify what we're starting to call a digital biomarker. And I believe that will come. However, many of those tools at present have very poor quality. I mean, when you run these wearables through highly qualified benches, I mean, they have error rates like 40–50%. I mean, it's still really way off. But so it will gradually improve, and then indeed it will become something. It should be kind of like almost a warning system. So you don't want to see all of the tracking. You want to know when a pattern starts to shift. And that's maybe a signal that needs to go either to the patient or to a caregiver or to someone in the environment of the patient.
Thank you. Sarah.
Sarah Garner from NICE. I'm partly speaking for Bettina, I think, as she's not been able to join us for today. We've just done a piece of work through the IMI Get Real project, where we worked with Melanoma Patient Network Europe and held a focus group, did some qualitative research with them. And the point of the research was to understand about exactly that, people's experience of participation in trials. And the message that came home, and it's the melanoma patient groups as specific issues, was about the choice of comparators, that the randomization per se wasn't the barrier to recruitment, it was the fact that they were potentially being randomized to inferior care. And then we had a panel, we reported back at the plenary session the results of the study, and we had a regulator, there was myself, a regulator, industry people, clinicians, and we were asking, you know, why this was, and they were all pointing the finger at everybody else and saying, you know, well, this is because the regulator asked for it, and the regulator said, no, we didn't ask for it. And the clinician gave a particularly poignant thing that he was forced to do rectal exams because one of the previous drugs had a rare adverse effect. So every single patient, he knew this was a different patient group, but he thought, or whoever put the protocol together said, you need to do rectal exams on every visit. And another patient said that I actually filled in the quality of life questionnaire to say I was dead, just because I knew they wouldn't read it and I wanted to check. And I think there's been a little bit of work with this. We did a literature review to support this as well. And I think we could be doing more to actually ensure, and bearing the Declaration of Helsinki in mind, that we could be doing more to actually make it a positive thing that people are enrolling in trials, that they're getting the best care or this alternative, and there really is true equipoise, and I don't think as a community we're doing enough to ensure that. Yeah. It wasn't a question, sorry, it was, yeah.
Yeah. Would anyone like to comment on that?
I agree, and again, I think it's because of,
To John.
in part, what's been largely, I would say, somewhat paternalistic in how we approach it. So we really need to understand what those issues are and get those perspectives from the patients and the people that are around them, because it's participation in a clinical trial is not just about the patient, it's a family experience. And it takes a toll on the whole family as well, and those are also important elements that need to be understood and better addressed.
With regards to pointing fingers, I think that we need more dialogue. I think that there's more dialogue needed between the industry and the regulators as to, okay, what and then of course the patients, as to what can be accepted as evidence and how far should we go, or what is acceptable. Because I think as an industry we are, especially when it comes to clinical trials, we are pretty risk averse. I mean, there's a lot of money involved. So we want to do it really good, really good, maybe too good. And maybe that's where we're going, maybe sometimes a bit overboard. But I think that in dialogue with the regulator, I think we maybe need to recalibrate a little bit of these bureaucratic steps.
Thanks. Anyone else want to come in on that?
One remark again, if you listen carefully, there are regulators, pharma companies, and patients. Doctors disappear. It's just a small remark.
And some would say not before time. John.
Yes. Yeah, because Bettina is not there, because normally she can do this beautiful and much better than I do. I'm so pissed about what's happening right now. You talk about patients, but you not really listen, because there is more than enough evidence that patients really want to do. For example, 24/7, yes, it's already done. Military is doing that. Ebola, we had a whole cohort of military going in with exactly this, and it's a medical device. So don't come with me, it's not yet there, it's there. That's the first thing. The second one is, if I'm a diabetes patient, yes, it's about the literacy. But my problem is not that everyone here is saying doctors must be there, nurses will be there. We have the elephant in the room is that we do not have the human resources anymore to keep up with the demands and the needs of the total population that's getting older. So we need to go somewhere where we actually let these patients make decisions themselves, because you stay in your own four windows and you think I'm doing a perfect job, and you do. But in the meanwhile, instead of 3 patients, there are 10 patients outside, there are 20 patients outside that are not going to get that care. So we need to get there into a shift that we are getting actually these patients to have their data available, and they will give that data to an mHealth, eHealth, or whatever it will be, to have at least some indication what to do next. Because right now in the Netherlands, or I live in Switzerland, it doesn't matter. In the Netherlands, 2 months till I get a physician. In Switzerland, it's about a month till I get a physician. And in the meanwhile, I have no clue. And yes, it has an impact on my life, because I have no clue what's happening. So the first thing they are going to do is asking me for vital life signs. The second one that they are asking is, how do you feel? And then they don't give a shit. So, because they only are interested in their vital life signs as they already do 200 years. So if someone is telling me we cannot have data, or it's an harass for the patients, if patients understand for what you need this data, they're more than willing to do that. And now I talk about 25% of the patients, because you're right, we also have not informed patients. But these are exactly the problematic of the WHO and the Commission is talking about, because these are the people with the lower education, the lower social class with no income, with no whatever. So I do not hear anything what's going to take care about that. And in the same time, we are talking in all the congresses about, are we going to make this pricing? Because I didn't hear today, so I will think, let's do the pricing in it. If we are going to do the pricing, we more and more need to talk and to negotiate with governments for the total population. Well, if we want to have the total population, then we need to have a solution for the first thing I was saying just before. So we do not have enough human resources, so we cannot pretend that or the physician or the nurse is going to take care about this big disaster what's coming towards us. And the second one is we need to give tools to the patients that they can actually do something and then get this medication as soon as possible in the right thing. And I didn't hear it. I only hear big data the whole time, but I don't see or hear how we are coping then with the patients that are actually need to make the decision at the end.
Can I respond?
Yes?
Yeah.
I think maybe you misunderstood in part what we were saying, so maybe we could be clearer. Number one, I completely agree with you, and I don't think that there's not a need or a place for wearables or tools. I think there's a total place and a need for it, and certainly it's been transformative for diabetes management, for example, to have glucose monitors and insulin pumps, et cetera, for self-management. So I think what Bart was talking about was the accuracy of some of the reporting on some of these instruments in a clinical trials context. So we need to separate that out, I think, from self-management a little bit. Because by virtue of participating in a clinical trial, you are getting much higher frequency care generally than you would in your ordinary life. I think the point, at least I was trying to make about mobile technology, is I think there's a very important place for mobile technology in scaling these limited resources that already exist. And that we're not talking about scaling physicians. We're talking about scaling frontline healthcare. And the frontline healthcare providers, at least in this country, tend to be lower cost. They tend to be people who care. They tend to be people who are trusted. And if we can take what's working, and what's working now on paper, and there's a lot of really great stuff working, particularly in low-income areas, and scale that, I think we can start to see some solutions that apply for smart clinical research as well as smart outcomes management. And I think the only way we're going to get to scale is through technology and integration of technology. I completely agree. My point is just, it's more than giving somebody an app and say, go home and take care of yourself. It has to be an integrated approach where it's part of the total healthcare management.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Daniel, sorry.
I would fully agree with that. And I think we need to look at how such networks can then actually be kind of recruitment centers also for research. And I think then we're actually serving two purposes with one solution.
Yeah, Daniel.
Touched one interesting point. It's some people who are not so rich to reach the healthcare facilities. We did survey in Lithuania looking how what differences are between the, let's say, high society and low society, because they have equal rights to the resources of the health care. And it was interestingly that this 1/3 of so-called rich part of the society used 2 times more resources of the healthcare to compare with this, which are poor. So the only what we are discussing now to put some entrance fee into the polyclinics or into the hospital to stop unneeded services by some like 10 euro, 20 euro payment. So thus opening doors for those who really need these healthcare facilities. So it's, but it's problematic. It's a social, socioeconomic thing in healthcare, but not probably about research.
Jocelyn, do you want to comment? I mean, you mentioned the difficulty of getting people from minority ethnic communities to participate, and That's a very real problem,
Yeah.
a very real issue for clinical research.
Yeah, I mean, but I think to your point, it also speaks to some of the health equity issues that are pervasive across all of healthcare delivery, not just research. And I think it's something as a society we should continue to discuss and try to solve. There's been a lot of discussion and debate about industry doing better, but clearly industry can't do it alone. There has to be an integrated multi-stakeholder approach here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of time and we have to finish promptly, but what you four don't know is that this is your lucky day. Because I am the tooth fairy. And I have the power to grant you one wish. A wish about changing the framework to secure better, more user-friendly patient engagement in clinical research and development. Now, this is your moment. What are you going to wish for? Bart. All right, Jocelyn. Yes, let's go. Ladies first.
There are a lot of things.
Just one. You've got one wish.
One thing. I think maybe creating one infrastructure or one platform for conducting research, whether it's a network or a technology or an approach that could be implemented across, would certainly remove a lot of barriers, give a lot more people access, streamline, create more efficiencies. So I think we have to look to technology for that.
Yeah. Danius.
As in Europe, we are creating the platform for one ticket office for the clinical trials in Europe. So I would wish for my country to close about half of the hospitals, all other to equip with decent equipment and personnel, and to do clinical trials in all these remaining hospitals after my wish will be fulfilled.
Thank you. Vicky.
Oh, I think to equalize the playing field with respect to inequity of care and inequity of care delivery. And I think technology can play a part in that, but clearly policy needs to play an important part of that, because it would get to a lot of what I think are fundamental issues with underperformance of all of the great stuff that we create and we develop. But once it gets out there in the real world, things aren't as pretty as they say. So, and a lot of it is due to inequity in care delivery.
And now,
agree with all of that.
Yeah.
Maybe find a way to slash assumptions. We're all coming at this thing from our own perspective and our own reality, and slashing these assumptions, creating a common understanding. And then rebalancing, I think, the procedures and the bureaucracy a little bit. I think that's probably time to look at that as well.
Brilliant. Well, ching, your wishes are granted. I'd like you to thank our panelists. I think we've had a fascinating and very productive conversation. I think it's shows that there is a great will to change. The challenge for all of us now, I think, is to turn that will to change into better engagement on the ground for patients and families, so that we can begin to address some of these unmet clinical needs. So thank you all very much. And I'd also like, because I have to run, to particularly thank Dwayne and Petra, Alison, Joe, the team from Vital Transformations, for giving us an opportunity to have this splendid meeting here in Washington.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alistair. Your check's in the mail. Well, we're in America. We can work that out. You're not the only person in this building who does that. Oh, sorry. Woodumpum, sorry. Cheap shot of the day. We won't be coming back. No, I'm just kidding. this, first off, we're waiting for the senator, so we will just, you will have a couple break, just a minute to go get some coffee, have a drink, and we'll wait for the senator. Senator Cassidy will be coming here. Obviously, you can hear there's a vote going on. As we heard from last night from Congressman Burgess, the 21st Century Cures bill has moved from the House to the Senate. For our European friends here, we have two houses that actually both do work, unlike the UK. And we're extremely pleased to have Senator Bill Cassidy here today, who is a member of the Health Committee, very involved with healthcare. He's a medical doctor himself, which I think will always add a certain credibility and understanding to what the issues we've been dealing with for the last 2 days. Obviously, real-world evidence and patient engagement are key. So with that, I know you have a very busy voting agenda, and we're extremely grateful for you being here, Senator. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
It's always a bad sign when they're already drinking before you speak. I'm just going to tell you that. And knowing that you've had really good people speaking, including folks who are involved in the same thing of which I'm about to speak, it is with a certain humility that I stand to address. But I probably do bring somewhat of a perspective as a practicing physician. During the campaign, I would tell folks I'm a gastroenterologist, and gastroenterology prepared me very well for politics. And I always noted if they were over 50, they got the joke, and if they were under 50, they looked a little quizzical. And I would think, you're going to get it. But also in my work as a physician, I did a lot of medical research, and principally with industry, but sometimes with government. And it was interesting because over the time, we would see that the amount of paperwork required and the expense associated with the study dramatically increased. And at some point, there became this sort of tipping point where all of a sudden industry was cutting back on what they could do because of the increased expense. But of course, the increased expense is related to the increased regulatory burden. The nurse who was my coordinator, she was so good. And I said to her, Pam, do you think all this paperwork actually makes a difference? And without quoting her verbatim, since I'm being videoed, she goes, no, it doesn't. So with that, let me recount a couple of experiences I had the last couple days as kind of a successor to that. Because we were really looking for broad strokes as we were doing our research. And they would slice and dice and find subpopulations. But even then, if it wasn't a principal outcome, then sometimes you weren't sure about the data. And so yesterday I had two interesting conversations. One was with DaVita. They've got this huge database of all their patients on dialysis, and it's a huge, for those who are from Europe, they have, I don't know, some incredible market share of all the dialysis patients in the United States, 30 or 40% off the top of my head. And they found, looking at their big data, that obese African Americans do better on dialysis than thinner African Americans or normal body weight whites. Now that totally turns things upside down. You would totally expect the obese patient to have more complications, et cetera, but that big data kind of showed them it should show them that observation. It doesn't give them an answer to why it is. But intuitively, you never would have thought that. And then last night I went to, everybody's wearing orange. Obviously, we're in kind of a Halloween motif. Last night I went to a benefit Monster Mash, a Halloween kind of scenario, for a young child, for a young boy who has a slow-growing pediatric glioma. And there's so few of those such as he that there's hardly any research done unless it's really pushed by a motivated parent, because otherwise there's too few cases. They had a couple of the researchers there, and I spoke with them, and one of them said, oh yes, it appears to be a point deletion, and it may govern the RAS operation, but it appears to be an epigenetic function on top of this deletion, because normally this deletion wouldn't cause such problems. So limited population, with limited benefits from genomics, trying to figure out the answer for this incredibly compelling case, which kind of leads us to where we are. How do we lower the cost of research? How do we help those with rarer diseases? How do we come up with that precision medicine so that it's hard to think of obese African Americans on hemodialysis as a precision medicine, but there's enough folks there that what is it that makes it better for them that you could come back and take it to those who are not so kind of ideal body weight challenged and make it better for them? And that is the challenge of what you have been discussing. I was, again, yesterday speaking on phone with someone I'm trying to hold a research conference back home. This fellow really is a smart man. And he goes, well, the future of medical research is electronic medical record plus genomics plus supercomputing to come up with an answer for that particular person. Well put. That's what your conference is all about, so I gather. I'll focus the remainder of my remarks on that electronic medical record aspect of it and try and bring that down to that precision medicine. Because obviously garbage in, garbage out, the EHR is so robust, it is going to capture something that you are going to be able to marry with genomics and supercomputing to come up with some answer. But I would also argue that medicine is unique in that it also has the intangibles. The intangible of something which is not a sodium, a potassium, a creatinine, a height, a weight, a BMI. It is also that sort of kind of wow. You look at somebody and they're not quite right. That's hard to get that in a computer program. As an aside, there used to be a diagnosis, FLK, funny looking kid. Now, it became politically incorrect, so it was dropped as a diagnostic code. But really what it should have said, I'm not joking, but what it really said is the trained clinician's gestalt. It wasn't quite as catchy. The trained clinician's gestalt that there's not something right. And that is what I think we are not capturing in our current narrative. There's an article in the New England Journal of Medicine from a couple of days ago. A friend emailed to me, a woman, Lisa Rosenbaum. Dr. Rosenbaum basically kind of summarizing a book by Wachter about the experiences of electronic medical records and the difficulty the practitioner has had in implementing. It makes a couple of interesting kind of observations. For everybody that thinks those who don't like EHRs are just a bunch of Luddites, who they're going to resist change because it's not pen and paper, it points out survey data like 80 to 90% of physicians feel like EHRs is the place to go. They acknowledge it. They look at it. But then it goes on to say that that said, the satisfaction with it is terrible. They spoke of the intensivist who took yesterday's note and today's note and superimposed them and held them up to the light, seeing what the changes were, because so much was carried forward that she could not see the interval changes unless she held them up and superimposed the two sheets together. Now, obviously, the prism through which we should be viewing all this is patient care. This cannot be good for patient care. If she is not alerted, that intensivist, to the interval change by a well-written note, then something is going to suffer. But I'd also argue that some sort of big data is going to suffer. There's a patient who came to see me once. I used to always look at muscle mass. I'm a liver doctor, really. Gastroenterology is my kind of what I did to pay the bills, but hepatology was my real interest. And I saw this fellow with this funny hepatic tumor, and he came in and he just looked built. He looked like every man over 50 wants to look. And it wasn't natural. And so you feel his palms, and he's got calluses. So he's a weightlifter. I get that. He's a weightlifter. But, sooner or later he fessed up to using, somebody didn't prescribe them, and nonetheless he acquired them, anabolic steroids. I'm not really quite sure how you would put that in a note that someone else would follow through on. Calluses on hands. Is he a weightlifter? Because you're either a gardener, a weightlifter, or a laborer, but one of those three, so you got to sort that out. muscle mass increased. So there's something there that is the equivalent of funny-looking kid. It is a gestalt that something is different about this patient. Is that difference clinically meaningful? I have not seen an EHR yet that grabs a gestalt. Now, maybe gestalts aren't important. Maybe gestalts really can be kind of brought down into a bunch of disconnected points, which with supercomputing you can actually put together in a pattern. Now, that will be the challenge. But I'm not sure when it comes to actually seeing the patient that promise is going to come through. Now, you've heard from Whitehouse and Burgess about what we're attempting to do with electronic medical records. I think, in a sense, we're trying to make the two main things upon which they are judged as usability and interoperability. As a woman whose pediatric neurologist goes to 6 different hospitals said to me, why do I have a different form with a different program at every hospital at which I attend? This is, very slow. There's an opportunity cost. Instead of her kind of seeing patients, she's having to navigate through this. It really shouldn't be that way. She should have the form that comes up, Charlotte Holman's pediatric neurology form. And whatever program she's using, she pulls up Charlotte Holman's form and it populates it from the underlying database. But what she sees is constant. Now, in a sense, that is so simple, we ask why it is not the case. I would argue that, frankly, the physician has been the one who has been most neglected in the decision-making process about what to produce. Secondly, it should be truly interoperable. We had a hearing, the CEO from Cerner was there. I'm sure you know this as well, but he used the term semantic interoperability, where it isn't just that you can read one another, but if someone's had blood pressure with their home monitoring, at their barber shop, with Cerner and with Epic, that it all just kind of fits in. And it doesn't matter where it came, but on a certain date, this was the blood pressure and these were the medications the patient was taking. And it pulls from all these different sources to present to the physician it in a cogent flow sheet. That's what I would do with paper and pen. It would take me more time, or maybe not. So I think that's where we were going to need to come to. It may be that with your big data, you effectively have semantic interoperability. You're just doing it with supercomputers as opposed to at the patient's bedside. Maybe so. I don't know that. If not, you sooner or later will. But on the other hand, if the patient and the physician are frustrated in their interaction, I think eventually patient care suffers, but also the promise of EHRs plus genomics plus supercomputing won't quite achieve everything it wishes to achieve. I'll take some questions if you wish, but I'll leave it with this. A doc came up and he was, you know how children have a 14-year-old, so I remember this. Children will draw pictures of their doctors, and there's a physician I know who, when he was a little boy, his father was in animal husbandry, and so an artificially inseminated bovine. And so they asked, his teacher asked him to draw a picture of what his daddy did at work. So the parents are getting a call. Do you know what John did today? Well, that's okay. That's actually what his father does do. But so we have these kind of pictures that children draw of some kind of authority figure in their life. And it was a child drawing a picture of her pediatrician. And the picture of her pediatrician was not of someone with a stethoscope or even a needle, bending over, loving, touching, something like that. It was the doctor looking at a computer screen. And of course you smile and then you think it's tragic. Going back to how people under 50 and over 50 react differently to my kind of standard joke about my profession. I'll also say when I use the anecdote that my wife's a breast cancer surgeon, retired, but formerly. And someone would come in and have the diagnosis of breast cancer. So it's not what they want to hear. And she found it was always the husbands who were more distraught than the wives. The wives kept keeping it together. But she would look at them both, and she would say, just make sure that they were hearing her words of hope. This is cancer. It is not a death sentence. It is something that we can remove. We can give you chemotherapy, and we can radiate. We have a couple more tests to do, but there is hope. And the whole time she is just fixed on them, making sure that she understood that they understood. Now, if their daughter happened to be with them, and the picture their daughter drew of my wife was this, that is lost. So in our desire to have the promise of EHRs plus genomics plus big data to come up with precision medicine for that child with an epigenetic defect on top of a single deletion with a glioma, or the cystic fibrosis patients, or the registry patients, or anyone else who's going to benefit from big data, if we lose that, looking into the eyes and making sure that someone is understood, we've lost. We've lost tremendously. And whatever we may gain from precision medicine, we will lose from the ability to inspire hope. I don't know if anyone has any questions. And the principal question may be, can we get to the bar? But yes, sir.
It's nice to have a senator from Louisiana who's also a doctor. We have Dr. DeSalvo at the Office of National Coordinator.
Oh, yes.
And you've got a president senator in Senator Bro, who worked very hard on the Health Committee. My question is, what do you want to do, and what resources can you put together to get something done in the next 13 months?
As regards what?
As regard legislation, what do you want to accomplish on the Health Committee? You know, 21st Century Cures has been thrown at you. What are we going to do? What's going to be a tangible accomplishment that's going to move us ahead on what we've all been talking about of applying medical record systems or what? Because the money doesn't seem to be there to get things done. The money doesn't seem to be there to get NIH more funding.
So my personal priorities on the Health Committee, and whether or not they're accomplished, will obviously depend on the numerous factors, is one, to put something forward that would benefit electronic medical records. I think Sheldon Whitehouse spoke to that. Frankly, number one. Number two, I would like to also see increased funding for the NIH, but I'd also like to see NIH have a little bit more accountability in how they spend their money. NIH is an incredible organization, but right now their spending priorities do not reflect the neither the DALYs nor the expense to Medicaid, Medicare, or U.S. society, and it does not reflect years of life lost. And so any of those three criteria would be a reasonable criteria by which to judge spending, and NIH's does not reflect that as I think it should. They may disagree, but I'll say that. And lastly, which is related to mental health as well, is, excuse me, to your research agenda as well, is I'm pushing with Chris Murphy a mental health reform bill. There needs to be more research in mental health. There needs to be more focus upon where that research dollars are spent, and that should guide our treatment. It's a huge mental health issue in the United States, which the federal government, I think, is inadequately attending to. So those would be my three healthcare priorities on the Health Committee. And we've actually got some fairly mature thinking on all three. Legislation drafted in two of the three, and a lot of work is gone. So if it doesn't happen this Congress, I'm cautiously optimistic that it could. We can find the money for the NIH, and I think there's a real interest on both sides of the aisle to find the money. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hello, Senator. Mark Trusheim from MIT. Thanks for the informative and entertaining comments through all this. We're an international group here, some from the U.S., some from Europe. Everyone always is interested in how government can help. I think the question I'd put for you is, what can we do from our side of academic research, from industry, from our international partners and examples, to help provide you with whatever it is you need, evidence, examples, stories, support, coalitions? What is it that we can most be helpful to you to help you make the progress that you so obviously want to achieve and that we'd like to see you achieve?
Let me give you some examples of how you have helped. There's an economist at MIT, Andrew Lowe, who's come up with some very innovative ways about how we could bond out future savings if we had an effective treatment for Alzheimer's dementia, and we could bond against those future savings to pay for current research. In that kind of paradigm-shifting conversation, in which we're not kind of scrabbling, robbing Peter for Paul to find money to increase the NIH budget, but rather we could say, wait a second, there's a promise of savings. Can we bank that promise now? So be creative. Secondly, the Europeans have done some nice work. I think it was Janet Woodcock or someone who spoke of a consortium where either EU or the British government or together had put dollars towards research, and that attracted private dollars. That is something else I am thinking about. How do we build that same sort of coalition, consortium, in which public-private partnership that we can entice federal dollars to, we can hopefully get federal dollars to entice private dollars for some of these more focused areas that we need to address. Thirdly, this is a technical field. Much of what y'all do is difficult to comprehend. As a physician, I have a real leg up, but nothing substitutes speaking to your legislator or your senator and speak to her about the promise and about the frustrations. My state, we're going to put together a conference as one example, and in our conference I hope to first do an inventory of strength. What is everything we have in our state? We have this university doing big data, this university with a medical school, we've got this very diverse population, we've got a lot of poverty with disease, therefore diseases which people wish to address. And then I'm going to try and bring in business people and state legislators so that they can hear both the opportunity, the promise, and the challenges to achieve greater research capability in our state for our residents and our patient population. If you can help think imaginatively about that and speak to your own folks, I can think of some more. Y'all are really creative people. Y'all are really smart people. If you can kind of plug that in to what policymakers have to do in order to marshal resources, that would be very capable, very helpful. Not just stand at a distance and not just kind of criticize, but actually figure out the stresses thereof and combine those two. Mark, I'll give you my email, man. If you got thoughts, please send them to me. I'm very serious. Yes, sir.
Just one question about the data protection ruling that came out of the EU last week, where there was the European Court of Justice ruling about not being able to share data transatlantically anymore. This is a big problem for a lot of us who work here internationally in data.
Was that, I'm sorry, I wasn't familiar with that. Is patient-specific data or de-identified data?
It's part of the safe harbor agreement between the U.S. and the EU. The European Court of Justice ruled that those data transfers are no longer going to be able to happen over the Atlantic.
But again, what kind of data?
Electronic data. So,
but patient-specific?
Not just patient-specific, all data.
Really?
Google data, Facebook data,
really?
Medical data, yeah, everything. Yeah, yeah. So we're wondering if, I was just curious if this could be something you could see getting put into the TTIP negotiations potentially. This is potentially has enormous impact for healthcare. It has tremendously negative connotations for those of us working in data.
Cuts across, and again, if you're doing rare data, go back to this pediatric slow-growing glioma.
Yeah.
I mean, you combine EU and the US, and you're still going to have very few cases.
I'll happily send you some information on
Please.
the ruling. Yeah, it's terrible. A couple more questions. The senator's been extremely kind, so yes.
Donald Singer, I'm with the European Therapeutics Association. I'm UK-based, and what's interesting there is costs of our health there are growing, and yet last time I looked, number 2 and treasury income was the pharmaceutical industry. So there's net national benefit. I just wonder whether you've got a view on how things are looking, whether this meeting and what's related is all about, is it about, as you say, later cost savings in the health system? Is it about better economy generally? Or is it about greater good because unmet need will be met and it will cost us more, but it's worth doing that irrespective of the fact the overall costs might be greater as a bigger package?
Well, as a physician, I'm going to say our goal should be how we're going to improve outcomes, right? I think if you have subsidiary goals then it's easy to get distracted by the subsidiary. Now, let's just talk about pharmaceutical cost and medical research, and I'm a hepatologist, so the treatment for hepatitis C. You can look at the cost of that drug in the United States, but I think very expensive in the UK as well, and it just kind of knocked your socks off. On the other hand, if you look at the cost of caring for someone with end-stage liver disease the last year of their life, it's about, in US dollars, several years ago, was $150,000 to $200,000. If they go to a transplant, it is $300,000 at least, with $100,000 every year thereafter. If you eradicate their hepatitis C, and they never go to that last year preceding transplant, then every year of their life till 75, you've saved much more than you have spent on that therapy. So now on the other hand, patient selection is incredibly important. If you're giving anti-hepatitis C medicine to someone who is the worried well, who is going to die with the infection when she's 100, but not because of it when she's 45, you've wasted the money. But I don't see your meeting as focused upon patient selection, except kind of en passant, to use a chess term. You really want to know how to cure the disease. And then you allow others to decide the best way to manage the market in which it is conveyed. I think what the EU and the United States has to offer the rest of the world is the next phase. If public health was the reason that we live much longer now, clearly modern medicine after that will be the reason we live much longer and more productively thereafter. I may not be answering your question directly, but I think if we just focus on the patient outcome, we will benefit. By the way, just as an aside, my daughter is 14, and we went to the National Geographic Museum, and they had a picture of Lucy, the original kind of biped who was thought to be a and she's 20 years old, and I noticed the chart said, and you could see it on her skeleton, significant degenerative arthritis of her spine. And I thought, my gosh, now she may have had several pregnancies by age 20 when she died, but why would a 20-year-old have significant DJD of her spine? You just don't think of that now, unless you're in the third world. And our modern research is the reason we don't think of DJD in a 20-year-old. You know what I'm saying? So I'd like to think that this conference is focused on finding the answers that would mean that some disease, which right now is terrible, 1,000 years from now, when one of us is up in a museum, they'll say, we never see that disease anymore. You know, isn't that kind of crazy?
I'm sorry, just one last question. Senator, thank you very much for all you're doing. We appreciate your support and your help, because this is a huge challenge, and we can appreciate anything we can get. But one thing to put your mind at ease just a little bit, the technology to link clinical data, genomic data, real-world data, supercomputing capabilities already exist right now today. Mm-hmm. With Oracle, we have some. I can give it to you. We'll sell it to you. I'll license it to you. How's that? Right. But the other thing I just wanted to mention is that over the past several months, we've been having several discussions with the VA. Granted, VA's had its issues and whatever, but I have been blown away by the capability, dedication, commitment of those folks in that VA system and what they're trying to accomplish. And there's a guy in Salt Lake City who's leading a clinical genomics program for the VA, and there's a guy in Boston leading the preclinical research genomics for the VA. They're under separate guidances, and they're both trying to do similar things, research and in clinical, but they're having the frustration is dealing with ability to get technology to effectively use to allow them to accomplish their task. And we've been talking to them about...
I'm sorry, the technology they need or the regulatory guidance?
The technology. Just the technology to accomplish their task.
No, let me stop. Because you have the supercomputers, and we have the ability to do the genome, so which technology are they missing out on?
It's the internal operative capabilities within the VA system.
Ah.
It's all the bureaucracy to trying to get to. They're working on computers that they can't even open spreadsheets of any size because they're too small. The guys are using their own Apple computers, their own Macintosh, Apple computers, to do things that they can't do on the VA IT system. can we help them do their job? And maybe you have some way to help these guys deal with their level of frustration to be able to accomplish what they really want to accomplish.
Well, if you want to sit around over drinks and talk about the dysfunction of the federal government, believe me, and at the end we would all be drinking more. I don't know the VA does not have an IT budget which is ample. The VA has gotten tremendous amounts of money, but their acquisition has not been great. So I can't answer that question. I don't know if it's a systems problem in the VA or if it's they need more money for technology. My bias, it's probably a systems problem because I was running late coming here because I was at a VA hearing on the systems problems of providing mental health care. On the other hand, if it's a money problem, we can work on a money problem. The system problem is more intractable.
Senator, really, thank you very much for your time. Please, let's thank Senator Cassidy. And there's certainly plenty of drinks if you want to complain about the federal government. We can sort that out for you. Everyone, thank you very much. It's been a long 2 days, but a great 2 days, and I'd like to thank you all for your participation. With that, Better Science, Better Health is closed. Thank you very much.